Anybody seen this passage before?
No.
What are your thoughts on it?
Yes.
Yes? No? Some no, some yes? What are your thoughts on this?
I agree.
Agree? On what part?
The 10%, 90%.
10%, 90%, sure.
Yeah. 2 plus 2 equals 4. If I want to get 6, I can't change the attitude of the other people, which is the first 2. I have to change my response.
That's right. What else do you guys agree with or disagree with?
I believe it.
Do you think they have a choice? Do we have a choice?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have a choice. Do you think it's important?
Without a doubt.
So you got to ask the question, what's the right attitude?
Got a component of being forthright, component of being honest, component of being direct. And
You
have
know-
a solution.
Sincere.
There.
Kevin, I like what you did because you started breaking it out as components. I mean, my quick answer is, hey, man, it depends, right? It depends on the situation. What's the right attitude? You're going to have to tell me the situation before I know that, and there's different components to it. And the truth is the right one is always, what? The one that works, right? We don't know. We take an attitude, and the one that works is the right one. At the traffic stop, it's contrite, humble, kind. But to Kevin's, I think it was Kevin that was saying it. Was it you, Kevin?
Yep.
Yeah, to Kevin's point, this is complicated. There are a lot of components, right? And we could get a whole lot of them right and get one wrong and skew the entire outcome of the meeting, right? That when we look at attitude, it's really this recipe with lots of ingredients that all compile and aggregate together to give you the end product of what we call somebody's attitude. And so, you could coach one of your employees when they're interfacing with the city manager to, hey, we need you to be real confident. We need you to be pretty humble. Make sure that you stay positive and very optimistic. And then they go in all defensive and somewhat disinterested in what the other person's saying and very self-centered. And you're like, oh boy, I forgot to coach them on those 3. Right? It's complicated. There are a lot of pieces to this, and we're not going to go through all of them, but what we want to look at is distinguishing attitude and understanding how do you coach, how do you manage, and how do you choose different components for a particular outcome from a particular situation. And before we can do that, we've got to figure out how does attitude get communicated? How do you perceive of another person's attitude? Now, there was some research done by a professor of communications named Albert Moravian, guy out of UCLA. And what he did was a bunch of clinical studies trying to understand how attitude, preference, and what was the other one? Attitudes, preferences, and feelings get communicated between people. And what he found, setting people in the room and doing all these experiments and tests and stuff, is that when you have 2 people and one of the people tells you a perception of the other person's attitude, a judgment, what that judgment's based upon is 7% verbal. What's verbal?
What they say.
Yeah, what they say. 38% tonality. What's tonality?
How they say it.
It's how they say it. And there's a lot to how they say it. It's, what are some of the components of how they say it?
Very loudly or quietly.
Volume, pace, what word you emphasize, pauses, stuttering. Yeah, all that stuff, right? It really comes out to anything you can hear in the voice. He said 55% of how we judge another person's attitude is physiology. What's that?
Body language.
Body language. And more. What else? If physiology is a broad term, if you meant body language, you probably would have said that. He said, no, this is body language and flush of their skin, dilation of their eyes, whether they're nervous and shaking, whether they're sweating, whether their heart rate is high, whether they're breathing heavy. All those things tell us a little bit about their attitude, feelings, and preferences, right? And we don't think about these things directly, but, if you get sitting with somebody who seems real calm and suddenly their eyes dilate, face turns red, they start breathing heavy and start sweating, you're thinking to yourself, man, something just happened. They just got angry or something's wrong, right? And we pick up on that and we make an inference about what's going on the inside. So Moravian characterized this whole grouping of communication as implicit. In other words, all the communication that's happening that's not what you're saying. is what he called implicit communication. In other words, you're communicating this to another person, but you're not saying it. And then he called the saying part explicit communication. And the thing that it begs as a question is, if your attitude is getting communicated by your breathing and whether or not you broke out into a sweat and turned red, how do you control that? Because back to Scott's point, I mean, maybe you can't control it, but we said we could control our attitude, but if our attitude is really a product of how we're body language and our physiology, how do you control that stuff? Any thoughts?
Wow. To make it real.
How do you control it? How do you make it real?
It has to be real.
It has to be real.
You don't make it real.
It has to be real.
Go back to the wine slide.
Yeah. Right? All right, let's talk about it a second. Our attitude is just a physical manifestation of what's going on inside our head. The self-talk, the conversation we're having with ourselves. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. Let's say you have to go in front of city council, a bit of a tense meeting. You've got all your notes. You have what you're going to say. You're going to have to talk for a few minutes, right? And as you're walking up, getting to the point where you're going to stand up in front of everybody and talk, you stumble, and your note cards fly. And not only do they fly and fall, but they slide underneath a stage where they just can't be retrieved, or they slide underneath somewhere where you can't get them. You're not going to have your notes. What's the thought that runs through your head just before your face turns red and your voice starts quivering a little bit?
Probably go into a fight or flight mode, kind of start to panic.
Yeah. And what's the words that are going on inside your head at that moment? What are you saying?
It starts with O and it ends with
O-T.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And then that little trigger turns into a conversation inside your head that goes, this isn't going to go well. What's my boss going to think when I come back and I tell him I blew this? What if they don't renew? What if I get called on the carpet and I don't have the answers I'd written down? All that conversation's running inside your head. And the more that conversation runs, the more your physiology changes. Your face turns red and the sweat starts showing on your brow, right? Because you're talking yourself into the physiology. Your attitude is a physical manifestation of the self-talk, of the conversation running inside your head. And Scott, we're going to hit the point you were making in just a moment. What it means is when you're having a conversation with another person or a group of people, that you have two conversations to manage. You have what you're saying out loud, and then you have what you're communicating to them through your body language and your tone of voice. And those are two separate conversations. And that they could communicate different things. And to Scott's point, if this one's trying to communicate one thing and this one's communicating another thing, you come across as inauthentic. We're going to talk about that in a little while. But you have two conversations, two lines of communication going to the other person at any given moment. One of them is what you're telling them. One of them is what you're projecting through body language and tone of voice. You guys following me so far?
Yeah.
And they're not particularly linked.
Well, that just happened to me. That just happened to me the other day. I was at a function that I wasn't very comfortable in and trying to hold a conversation, and I could tell that it wasn't effective communication.
Right. And it's the conversation going on inside of your head that correlates to this conversation number two. That inside conversation, somebody said in a workshop recently, the truth leaks out, right? That conversation somehow finds its way out to getting communicated to the other person, like it or not. Can't hide it. You're thinking it, it's coming out somewhere. Tone of voice, body language.